Get over here! Are you guys ready to talk about Mortal Kombat? I went and I saw it last week. I've got some thoughts, I've got some ideas, and I have some opinions. You're not asking to hear them, you're not asking to know them, but I'm going to give them anyway. Aegis is here to interview me and find out what I thought. And then we're going to talk a little more in detail about where we think the franchise is going. Aegis, how you doing today?
Oh man, I'm good. I've been meaning to see this movie, but I haven't been able to get out to see the movie because movie theaters in Nova Scotia are shut down again because of COVID. Damn you, COVID! And also, just no time. And also, a lot of Ink Master lately. Actually, that's a side note.
Right. For me, I actually did get to go see it in theater. New Brunswick's a little more opened up, and I may or may not have gone to see it alone. And I was in an empty theater alone watching it, which was quite the experience.
You know
Very
though,
enjoyable.
going to movies alone is actually a little overrated. I learned this actually when I lived in New Brunswick myself, working for a big company there. I went to see Dragon Ball Resurrection F, and going there by myself, dope. No one's bothering you. You just sit there. It's like you're home, but you're in a big theater.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I was a little corny when I realized the movie wasn't going to do the Mortal Kombat. I may or may not have done it at the end credit scene
It didn't do it?
when it showed the Mortal Kombat. No, it didn't do it, so I did it.
Oh
And
my
since there was no one
god.
else in the theater, I got away with yelling it as loudly as I wanted to.
The one thing they could have done to get some easy points, they didn't do it.
No, no, no. They did do the music theme though, so
Okay,
that's a
that's
win.
good. That's almost good
Yeah,
enough.
yeah. So I think actually maybe that's a good starting point. They did try to do away with some of the corniness that is inherent to Mortal Kombat, and I would say that was probably a good thought. Even though I love the Mortal Kombat and like some of the really cheesy stuff that can happen in it, I feel like for a movie that wants to be taken seriously, the toning it down a bit on the cheese was probably a good idea.
Easy first
Uh,
question. Did it take itself too seriously?
No. So that was one thing. I personally thought that the movie allowed itself to breathe in a more human way. The best example I can think of is Kano. The Kano character was a dick, just like he is in the games, but he was very funny and he was very naturally funny. It was quite entertaining to watch him engage with characters that he didn't quite like, but also he was being forced to engage with. And that breathed an air of humor into the movie. Now, a few times it did go a little overboard with not taking itself seriously. Um, the movie had fairly realistic, as I said, interactions between characters talking. It didn't focus too heavily on plot, but there were conversations that were more believable. And those were interjected with just a few lines like, one character says flawless victory after he kills someone,
That's awesome.
and I thought it was a little corny considering how good the fight scene was for it to end with a character complimenting himself. And then another character, after a big dramatic scene, also kills somebody and yells fatality. And it was just kind of like, I get it,
That's
but
heavy-handed.
also, yeah, exactly. So I don't think it took itself too seriously. I think it allowed itself to breathe a little bit and have some entertainment. Did I wish that in one or two instances that had taken itself a little more seriously, yes. But honestly, the majority of the time, it did hit the balance quite well.
See those scenes there you just described. It sounds like they'd be perfectly fitting for in a tournament, and like the judges saying "fatality"
Right.
or like
Okay,
fans
we're gonna
fans in
get
the
to.
stands.
We will get to that in a minute. I'll wait for you to ask your questions, and we'll talk about the tournament in a minute.
Yeah, preface. Yeah, obviously I haven't seen it, so I don't know if that's a thing, but it
Yeah,
seems like an easy thing to do. Okay,
yeah.
so what about I guess I guess video game compared to the movie? Was there way more violence and brutality and gore in the movies, or was it kind of like similar to the games?
So compared to the old Mortal Kombat movie and compared to the old Mortal Kombat games, there was quite a bit more violence. I would say it was a satisfactory level of violence to see in a movie theater. It did not shy away from brutalness. There were definitely a few scenes where I sat there and I looked closer at the camera and wondered, did they actually pull this off practically? There were a few
Mm.
things that definitely were not pulled off practically, especially when Scorpion starts using his hand blade. Um, but a lot of the scenes, they were done well enough and gruesomely enough, and if it was CGI well enough, that it looked real enough that I was questioning whether or not it was CGI or practical. Do I think? Do I hope that there will be an unrated version released? Yes. I feel like the fights themselves were brutal enough and hardcore enough, and I feel like a few of the deaths were brutal enough, but there were a lot of character deaths in this movie, and I feel like a few of them deserved the more brutal payoffs that you would see in, say, Mortal Kombat 11.
Dude, was there any like finish them?
I don't know if anyone's actually don't remember if anyone said finish them, but there were fatalities in the way that you would picture from the games. There were certainly deaths that were set up to be like this is set up to be the fatality moment. Um, what I'm trying to say is it was certainly violent enough for an R rating, and that should appease a lot of people because they didn't ease off the clutch on it. They certainly tried to pull off violent and not just for the sake of violence, like it fit into the scenes predominantly. But I feel like if there's going to be a sequel, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, or if there's going to be an unrated version, I would actually hope for just a little bit more because this was like a solid Punisher type movie in terms of violence. But when you think Mortal Kombat, you want that step beyond where you can barely look at the screen, right?
Of course.
So I just hope that will happen in the sequel or maybe an unrated version that's coming to Blu-ray or something.
Here's something else too. I don't know about you. I haven't actually played a Mortal Kombat game since Mortal Kombat 2 or 3 for the Super Nintendo, so it's been a long time. How about you?
So I played some Mortal Kombat 10 just for fun, and I play a lot of Dead or Alive now, and I play some other like Soul Calibur type games.
Is it because of
I
the
haven't
boobies, Jay?
watched. No, it's not. I actually have liked the Dead or Alive games for a long time. I like how they play. Just like Soul Calibur, I just like fighting games. Tekken, I find that all of them are so expensive that I can't have them all at once. Like, there's no justification behind. Like, I have Injustice right now. I have Dead or Alive, and I have Soul Calibur, and I've played a bit of Tekken. So it's like to download Mortal Kombat, which by the time I got the Xbox was say a year and a half released, I think. It just to buy another fighting game, even though there are differences, I couldn't really justify it in my head.
Yeah, it's more of the
But
same.
yeah, but I love fighting games, and I certainly went on and watched all the fatalities. I watched all the brutalities. I even watched a playthrough of the main campaign. Um, so I haven't gotten to play the newest one, but I played them much more recently than you have, and I would
Oh,
say I'm a fan of the series. So
nice. Okay, well, moving on. Um, so, like I was saying before, before the call, so most movies that are kind of like based on video games or things that are based on cartoons, like let's say Transformers, the main character is somebody that's more human that we can actually, relate to. Was there a relatable main character in Mortal Kombat, and was he good or she good?
so the main character in the movie is not from the games, and in fact, I already forget his name. Um,
That's telling.
Yeah, I wouldn't say he was bad, to be 100% honest. He had a link to a main character from the games, and it was used as part of the story, albeit a little a little forcefully. It was almost like they needed to find a reason for him to be tied in, but it did play into the plot. Um, the problem that I ran into was, and this is light spoilers for anyone who's listening who wants to go into the movie with no spoilers. There was a line early in the movie where he's a UFC fighter, and his boss basically says to him, "You're a human punching bag, but you're like durable or whatever." And he's basically mocking him because in UFC fights, and you actually get to see a UFC fight that's decently well acted, and I would almost say it was choreographed with the actual actors, I would believe. Um, you get to see him basically take a whole bunch of punches without faltering, and he winds up losing the fight. I mean, that's the intro to the movie and the character. But later on in the movie, when he activates his special ability and finds his special abilities, because in this movie they all of the characters. special abilities are actually activated through magic
Hmm.
rather than science. So when his special ability gets activated, it is literally the armor from Black Panther.
Interesting.
So
So it can
he's a
like,
human punching bag.
and then it just like ejects like the energy that built up as like a shockwave or whatever.
Yes. So
Neat.
I guess it was neat. As soon as I heard the line "You're a human punching bag," I knew what his ability was going to be. Um,
Yeah.
and then the fact that it immediately came off as like Black Panther, like he's taking blows to build up the energy so he can hit someone back harder. Um, it would have been very cool if it wasn't done in Black Panther a few years ago.
Yeah. It has been a
Because
few
that would be
years
very
since Black Panther, so maybe not everybody will think of that. But if you're a comic book fan or a Marvel fan, you might be also more inclined to see this movie too.
And I know a lot of people's complaints were saying it was literal plot armor.
Literally, yeah. Jeez.
Yeah. So I don't know if so many people connected it to Black Panther, but they certainly were like, well, this basically makes him invincible. And as a side note, characters in Mortal Kombat are not exactly known to not go for the head, and his armor doesn't cover his head, and yet everyone keeps hitting him in the body throughout all the remaining scenes.
Yeah. Why wouldn't they just throw like a blade or something through his face? Yeah.
Right.
Plot
So
armor.
yeah, exactly. So I mean, I almost felt like the movie could have done itself a little better if it had shown him fully armored, including his face. Instead, it did come off a little corny, but for the two fights, I think it was two fights that it was involved in afterwards. It did make for a good fight scene, even though it basically made him invincible, especially since they weren't going for the head.
Right.
Um, but that is what it is. He was a solid enough character. I think he could have easily been replaced with another character from the series like Kung Lao or something, and it would have made just as much sense. Or they could have. Do you mind a slightly
Dude.
heavier spoiler?
No. Spoiler for sure.
So he could have been. He's a relative of Scorpion. He could have
Okay.
just been. He could have just been the new Scorpion, and it probably would have been better. Um, but they obviously wanted the original Scorpion to still be Scorpion.
Of course.
Um, yeah, so they had to come up with a completely unrelated ability for him, and I feel like plot wise it made sense that he was the relative. He doesn't become the new Scorpion, but for entertainment and tying it into the game a bit better, I do feel like maybe it would have been better for him to become the new Scorpion.
So that kind of could lead into the next question I have is, what was your favorite fight?
Um, I would say there's two fights, and it's debatable in my own head which one's better. It was Cabal versus was it Kung Lao? I actually don't remember which character it was, but it was Cabal versus another character, and Cabal himself. The reason why I distinctly remember it being him is it used his almost speed teleportation ability incredibly well for the fight, and Cabal looks amazing. His his gear, his setup, his I don't know what they're called, but his almost like axe blades are done so well, and his kind of like dark humor while he's fighting and kind of like mocking the other fighter, very well done.
Hmm.
And I'm actually going to take a quick second, and I'm going to look up who he was fighting because I definitely should know the name of the character, and it's going to be embarrassing that I don't.
Well, I mean, I've seen the opening, like 10 minutes of the movie or a 10 minute segment where you see Scorpion and then you see
Oh,
Sub Zero,
it's Liu Kang,
Liu Kang.
and I was blanking on that for a minute. I don't know why. Liu Kang is the guy who can use fire. He can throw down fireballs and stuff. So that was kind of embarrassing. But yeah, it's Liu Kang. He gets into a fight, and there's two fights between him and Liu Kang. The first one's certainly better. The second one was kind of lame.
Why is that?
Um, Liu Kang is just spontaneously a better fighter than him.
Well, yeah, fire,
And
of course.
well, yeah, and Cabal is kind of set up as being like it's almost impossible to hit him. And then in the second fight, he kind of just takes it on the chin, lets himself get knocked over, and then gets flamethrowered.
That
So
seems
it's kind of
incredibly
like,
dumb.
yeah, and I mean, it's set up a little better than that, but that is what it comes off as. Kind of like, okay, it's time that he needs to win,
So
so he's
like
gonna
kind of
win.
like dancing around it until, okay, guys, the fight's gone long enough. Let's just kill him.
Well, it's a second fight actually. There's two fights between the two of them. And like I said, the second one it really much does come off as okay, he needs to win.
Mm.
Therefore, he's going to win, even though there's no justification at considering the butt kicking he got in the first half. Um,
So that kind of takes away
uh,
the suspense from like the scene, doesn't it?
yeah, it does. It kind of it was one of the only fights in the movie where I kind of sat there and was like, well, they could have done a lot more with that.
Mm.
And the second fight, I think the second fight is going to be obvious. It was Sub Zero versus Scorpion. It takes up the last probably 8 to 10 minutes of the movie.
Holy
Uh,
shit.
therefore, therefore, I'm not going to get into heavy spoilers about it. Um, but I still have a complaint about it. They bring the new character into it.
Why?
He's not heavily involved until the very end. They almost keep him in the background, and I feel like it was almost intentionally set up so it was like when you have the fights in the games and you have the fight going on in the foreground and things going on in the background.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what they were going for. It was almost like you have that fight in the foreground, you have the character doing something in the background. It's kind of like, oh, what's he doing? Um,
Right.
but then they went ahead and they brought him into the actual main fight. So for the first like 7 minutes of that fight, it was flawless. No, it wasn't flawless, but it was very well done, and it was a fight between I believe both actors were actually like well trained fighters. So there's blows, there's swords, there's the two characters using their abilities in really cool ways that you would see from the games. And I'm not going to spoil anything. Um, but these two characters from the games hate each other and they want each other dead. And in the movie, it's no different. These two characters want each other dead, and the movie doesn't hold back from that. So I would be highly complimentary of that fight. It was very well choreographed. It was very well done, entertaining as heck. I'm not going to spoil who wins, but the fact that they brought in another character as part of the fight when they really shouldn't have,
It's kind of
I'm going to
telling
take
who
away.
won then.
Yeah, and I'm gonna take out. Yeah, I guess it is kind of telling, but I'm also gonna take away points because I don't think either of the characters in that scene needed support, and I don't think it did the movie any favors that they brought in support for one character.
Dude, so that just means that Sub-Zero got overwhelmed or fucking double teamed. That's fucking brutal. He was who
No,
I always loved playing when I was a kid, Sub-Zero, just freezing people, very haphazardly getting the finish because I was garbage at the game. I probably still am, but it's so fun just to mash and hope you get it.
right. So I guess we should say past tensively spoilers, guys. Um,
Womp. But yeah.
all right. So all right, what else would you like to know?
Uh, two last questions. So
Okay,
was the tournament good?
there was no tournament.
What?
Yeah, so there's
Why?
no tournament in the entire movie.
Oh, that drives the next question. There's going to be a sequel then.
There's going to be a sequel. The basic setup, plot, and pacing of this movie is the characters from Outworld don't want a tournament. They've won their 9 fights or their 9 tournaments already, just like in the games. They're going for their 10th tournament win, so they're allowed to invade Earthrealm. Um, because of that, they're trying to avoid any chance of having to restart or just losing. Um, Therefore, they try to cheat and go beyond this rule that kind of says, well, there was no rule that you're not allowed to fight each other outside of Mortal Kombat.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of scenes that are set up very much like one-on-one fights between characters. And like I said, there are a lot of characters from the games that get brutally murdered in this movie. Um,
So this is my lack of education, my ignorance here. So when they fight Mortal Kombat, I assume not on Earth. When they die, do they actually die, or do they kind of like get resurrected or respawn?
No, so in the games they die. Of course, there's frequently excuses for why they get brought back, but basically there's a character. There are characters. Mortal Kombat, the games get very convoluted over time, but there is a character that can absorb souls, and that happens in the movies too. Actually, I think that might have been brought on by the movies. I think the movies might have been the first place where that happened.
Hmm.
But basically, if you lose the fight, you get your soul absorbed by the Shao Kahn. Oh God, the people who are listening to this who are actually like hardcore
This
fans.
is stuff you should know,
It's
Winter.
it's been a while. The problem is it's been a very long time since I played the games or the movies. There's a character who can absorb souls. And I think that might just be a movie thing, but yeah, in the games, if you lose in an actual Mortal Kombat tournament, generally it's like a Roman Coliseum. It's unlikely you will survive.
That's cool.
Um, yeah, and the movie certainly doesn't shy away from that. Like the characters are trying to kill each other. There are deaths. Um, there are multiple characters that people like that die in this movie.
Hmm. Okay, but the overall thing is this movie was building to a new sequel or a potential sequel, and that's very likely going to happen because this one, I believe, smashed in the box office.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely. I don't want to say that it's completely sequel baiting. It definitely told its own story. It definitely was an okay story. It wasn't, it was very second fiddle to the fighting. But at the end of the movie, they hint towards Johnny Cage coming back. It's setting up like the characters are going to collect the other human Earthrealm Mortal Kombat characters, and it shows a poster for Johnny Cage.
That's cool.
And they're preparing for the actual Mortal Kombat tournament. That's, I'm assuming, going to happen in the sequel or the third movie.
It might be a
Um,
trilogy. That'll milk it even more.
right. So I don't know, but there was no actual tournament in this movie.
Ah, okay, interesting. Not that it's a bad thing, but it seemed like the obvious thing to do since it's Mortal Kombat, you know?
Mm. Oh, absolutely. And the movie does revolve around the characters knowing that the tournament exists and wanting to prepare for it and basically outworld cheating.
Mm,
But there is no actual tournament.
okay. Okay. Okay, well, let's end this on somewhat of a summary note. Out of 10, what would you rate this movie?
I'd say I'd give it a 6.5 to a 7. I'm not going to give it an overwhelming, glowing review because I do feel like the plot could have been told through an actual main character from the games. Guys, I know I made it obvious throughout this entire conversation that I don't have the most detailed memory of everything to do with Mortal Kombat, but I did grow up playing the games and I did enjoy them. I feel like there's multiple characters in Mortal Kombat that are interesting enough characters and human enough that you could follow them and be told their story, and it would be interesting. So I didn't quite get that choice that they made.
It is a big
Um,
universe, right? Like, there's a lot of characters, a lot of backstories and stuff. It's a big place.
it's expansive,
Yeah, that's the word,
and
thank you.
there were certainly some, like I get it. You want to talk to the games and the gamers, but I didn't need to hear a character kill someone and then be like flawless victory. Um,
Yeah,
like it just came off as very cornbally and cheesy.
yeah, cheesy is
Um,
definitely a good word for it.
yeah, and so like there were some things that I would say dragged the movie down. The fact that in Scorpion versus Sub Zero, they brought in another character that no one cared about to help win the fight. That dragged down what should have been probably by far the best fight in the movie.
You'd think,
Um,
exactly, yeah.
yeah, and even though it's Mortal Kombat, I don't need a huge detailed plot. The plot of the movie effectively was we want to murder all of the Earthrealm contestants before the actual Mortal Kombat starts because we can cheat and gang up on them,
Hmm.
or we can just get Sub Zero to go murder all of them.
Right.
So, like for me, it's kind of like there could have been a bit more done than that, but it is what it is. They clearly want to make it either a dequel, two
Duology?
movies, duology,
Maybe?
or they want to make it a trilogy. So I get it, but I also feel like Mortal Kombat realistically could have been made into one movie, and it would have been a much more in-depth plot because it would have flowed much more like a full plot instead of an introductory plot.
That does drive a lot of questions because I mean, a lot of movies these days, you kind of want to set it up so that you can have a sequel to make more money. Like, look at the King Kong movies. Like, there's now a monster verse apparently, which, okay, sounds cool, but was it really needed? Like, we have big monsters fighting. Cool.
Right, and it drags out the plot of movies so much because you want to drop so many tidbits of information, but you never want to give the full story until the sequel.
Yep.
And unlike, say, Lord of the Rings, where each movie told a fairly contained story, these movies feel like they're designed to be watched back to back to back to get the entire plot of one movie.
Yeah, kind of like
And I mean,
Infinity War and Endgame smashing together, big movie, but yeah,
right. You could have left out a lot of things on the side that didn't really need to happen.
yeah.
And that was this movie. You're gonna get what you wanted, and that's why I'm giving it an above average rating. If you want to go as a casual or hardcore Mortal Kombat fan, and I am certainly a more casual Mortal Kombat fan, um, you're going to get the fights that you're expecting. You're at least going to get the well earned R rating that you're expecting, and you're going to get, especially Sub Zero and Scorpion. You're going and Cabal. I was a fan of Kano, but he was played more for laughs, which he is in the games too. But he wasn't as badass as maybe he could have been. He's not played Cabal. Okay, so backing up, Kano was played for laughs a little bit more than maybe he should have been. Even though he is a comedian in the games too, he's more of a like evil mercenary badass. And in the movie, it hints that he is a mercenary badass, but in almost every scenario, he gets played like the dummy, right?
Mm.
So even though I liked Kano's portrayal, I feel like they could have done a little more. Cabal could have gotten more scenes, but he was dope when he was fighting. Like he didn't really get a lot of scenes outside of when he was fighting, but he looked so good. He fought so well. It was entertaining when he was on the screen. And Sub Zero stole the show.
Of
Uh,
course.
Scorpion, Scorpion, Scorpion could have stolen the show if he wasn't only in the first and last scene of the movie. Um, but I mean, his actor portrayed him very well. They showed the scene that they released, that 7 minute scene. The actor portrayed him very well. The fights were very well done, but he's only in two scenes. But Sub Zero, like the menace when Sub Zero's on the screen is palpable. It's real. Like he early in the movie he comes down a street and he's basically acting as an assassin and he freezes all the mist in the air and then just smashes it down on the ground and crushes like everyone around him.
Holy shit.
And it's like, okay, yeah.
I want
like
to see that now. Well,
yeah, like that kind of stuff. Like Sub Zero just steals the show in terms of menacing, in terms of his fighting skills. You're gonna get what you want watching Sub Zero, and with the others too. They just don't get as much screen time, right?
that's so strange that Scorpion wasn't like in it. I guess because they're trying to build up like a Scorpion 2.0 or his relative or whatever.
Yeah, well, there's a reason he's not in it. And again, it's plot oriented why he's not in it until the end, but he's not. And you get Sonya Blade and you get Jax, um, which they're two of the main characters, and that should tell you something how little I've talked about them.
Mm.
Um,
Rip. Yeah, shit.
they Yeah, Katana's in it too. Katana really is just there for the sake of fighting. Unfortunately, even though her fight scenes are entertaining, she doesn't look as badass as Cabal. Sonya Blade is portrayed very well. She's a strong character. She's a capable fighter. She's quippy, but there's no depth. And unfortunately, she just doesn't have the aura that Sub Zero gives to kind of carry it without that deep plot. Sub Zero doesn't have a ton of deep plot given to him, but there's so much malice, right? Um, so I guess what I'm saying is Tanya Blade was treated respectfully, as far as I can tell, accurately to the character, but she just wasn't given enough gravitas to stand out. Jax is sidelined for the vast majority of the movie, and unfortunately, because he gets sidelined, his few scenes near the end just aren't. He gets to fight, he gets to have his moment in the sun, but it's just not enough.
Mm.
And Goro's also in the movie, but Goro's also in the movie for like 5 minutes. So there's just there's just not enough of some of those characters, which is why tying back to I feel like if they cut out the character who literally doesn't exist in the game, these other characters could have gotten more screen time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where you try and pluck a real world person and a human to make it more understandable and relatable for us, which is okay, it makes sense, but again, you want to see these badasses on screen, you don't really give a fuck about this random person who probably could or should be a red shirt.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, it is what it is. I would give it it's an if I'm using five as an actual average scale, it is far better than a usual comic book movie. You're gonna get what you want, but just because you get what you want doesn't mean it couldn't be a lot better. this movie could have been a lot better, and there really is no justification as to why it wasn't.
Hmm. Well, I mean, you
They
said like a
clearly had
6.5 before. That's a decent rating, actually.
6.5 to a 7, but to me, it's they were clearly given the funding. They were clearly given the go ahead to do whatever they wanted in terms of violence. And they were clearly given the go ahead to pick whatever plot they wanted because they didn't follow the plot of the games
Hmm.
at all. So, um, so they what I'm saying is there was no excuses. They clearly could have gotten away with whatever they wanted, and they showed a little too much restraint. They didn't develop the plot enough, and they didn't give a few characters that should have been given time the time they needed to be fleshed out.
Well, maybe they'll take those learnings and criticism for the sequel, which will inevitably come.
Considering some of those characters are now dead, I would say those characters aren't going to get their
Makes sense. Shit.
moment. Anyway, all right, that's all we got, Aegis, on my end. I feel like we are good to say goodbye
Good
and
to rock and roll,
wish you
yeah.
all, yeah, I wish you all well in your mortal lives.
Later, guys.